Tell me this. Why do some messages persuade us while others fall completely flat? Or even make us dig in our heels into the ground even harder? Why can two people hear the exact same message and walk away with completely opposite reactions? That is the puzzle that our episode today is going to cover. The social judgment theory. Let's dig in. Welcome back to Communication Campus. I am Dr. Malynnda Stewart, and today we are exploring social judgment theory, also known as SJT. And this theory helps us understand and evaluate persuasive messages based on our existing attitudes, and helps us understand why persuasion is more about small shifts than dramatic conversations. So let's start with understanding the core assumptions of this theory. We have to remember that we all have attitudes on issues, ranging from acceptance to rejection. Now, I want to mention briefly that attitudes, if we think about a bullseye, attitudes are the easiest to change. They're the most malleable. We have our attitudes, we have our perceptions of things that are kind of along that. Then we have our values, we have our goals, and each of those layers, the more and more intense they are and the more deeply they are held to in the core, the harder they are to change. But our attitudes, they are like the papery thinness of an onion. And so a lot of times they're very easy to change. Now, when we explore a new message, we don't evaluate it in isolation. We often compare it to our anchor position. And this is our most preferred stance. So you can take any topic, any issue, and when you are introduced to that message that's related to it, you're going to evaluate it and kind of think, how does this relate to the core position that I've had, this anchoring position that I've had? And our judgment of this statement is going to be dependent on where the message falls in relation to what we call three latitudes. So we have to recognize that we all have different attitudes, and every time we come across something, we're going to do this little check. Does this fall in line with what I already agree? And am I going to accept it? Or am I going to reject it because it doesn't support the ideas that we've already had? So let's talk about these three latitudes. The first one is the latitude of acceptance. Positions that we find are reasonable and worthy of consideration. For example, if your anchor is, I support renewable energy, you may accept proposals to fund solar or wind projects. See how that works? So if you come across a proposal, you come across something that's trying to persuade you, and it's aligned with our latitude of acceptance because it's connected to or related to our anchor, we're going to just take that in. We're not going to really judge too much on it. On the other hand, we have our latitude of rejection. And these positions are going to be seen as obviously objectionable or unacceptable. So, for example, with our renewable energy idea, proposals that ban renewable energy, we're going to reject those. We're going to be going in our brains, in our heads and everything about, no, that doesn't align with what I go with, so I'm not going to listen to that message. I believe in renewable energy, and your argument about why I shouldn't, I'm going to reject. But we also have, in many cases, a little land of gray. And this is going to be our latitude of noncommitment. And these are going to be positions where, like, meh, I don't really know. We're undecided. We might reject it, we might accept it, we're not really sure. So maybe you are unsure about how nuclear energy would fit within your renewable energy argument and your feelings about it. So you're not fully for it or against it because you don't know enough about it. So every time we are interacting with a message that's trying to persuade us, we kind of instinctually put it into one of those three buckets. So effective persuasion often happens by targeting positions in the latitude of non-commitment, surprisingly, or near the level of acceptance. And the reason for that is when I'm trying to persuade you, I don't have to really work to persuade you if you're already doing the thing, right? And that's also not going to really help me gain momentum if I'm only talking to the people that already agree with me. If I want to see persuasion really having an impact, I need to talk to people and gain momentum, gain support. Well, the people that are going to reject that idea probably not going to be super helpful. And the people that are non-committal, well, there's a potential there. So if I'm creating a persuasive message, I need to acknowledge the people that are already in support of this. I do want to acknowledge the people that might not be in favor of this and see if maybe I can at least get a little bit of a seed planted within them. But I'm going to focus my attention on that latitude of non-commitment because they're kind of on the fence already. So a big piece that we want to consider here is the fact that ego, ego is playing a huge role here. So ego involvement talks about how central an issue is to your identity. And the higher your ego involvement, the smaller your latitude of acceptance and the larger your latitude of rejection. So if this is something that you are really passionate about, for example, I am a huge advocate and proponent of everybody has the right to healthcare. I believe health and the ability to take care of yourself, get access to care is a human right. And that is a big part of my identity. It's a big part of where I spend my time. So if somebody's going to create something that's going to go against that, my fuse, my window of consideration for that is going to be very, very small. On the other hand, if I am listening to something that does support that, I'm going to have a much wider window and a lot more time to give to that person because they're talking about things that I'm passionate about. Next, we want to think about our assimilation effect and recognize that messages closer to our anchor seem closer than they really are. And oftentimes we will assume some certain things because it seems like it fits my beliefs. It seems like it's matching my anchor. And if it's closer to that, we're going to give it a little bit of wiggle room. We're going to allow it that extra stretch. Now, on the other side, we have contrast effect. And when messages far from our anchor seem even more far than they really are. Like they're going to see much, much further because they're kind of lining up in the things that we don't agree with. So we're going to seem like it's much further out. And if we really evaluated, we're like, wait a minute, okay, actually, this might not be as far as I expected. Now, for example, here, someone deeply invested in vegetarianism, for example, might reject even the most moderate proposals about meat consumption as being too extreme. So there's some pieces here, and I hope you're following this. If not, you know how to find me. So social judgment theory is powerful because it explains why persuasion is often a matter of incremental change. Whether it's a political campaign or a public health message or even a family decision, Effective persuasion requires understanding that someone's anchor, their primary view on a topic, is going to require us to gauge their latitudes and craft messages that are going to fall close to acceptance and non-commitment. This is why knowing your audience is so important. We want to really think about where they're coming from so that we can target that message in the right way. So, to sum it up, we judge messages relative to our anchor position. And we categorize them into the 3 buckets: the latitude of acceptance, rejection, and non commitment. Ego involvement is going to shape how open or closed we are to that persuasion. And we have to remember that persuasion works best when we move people step by step and not try to convince them to make 10 steps ahead. So thank you for joining me on this episode of Communication Campus. In our next section, we are going to be talking about elaboration likelihood theory. So remember that persuasion isn't just about winning arguments. It's about moving people one step at a time. We'll see you next time.